Hey everybody, it is your favorite ninth grade history teacher back with another screencast. Today we're going to talk about the medieval changes in England and in France that happened that kind of started to slowly shift them kind of very slowly down the path to the democracies we see today, and actually initially kind of more into solid monarchies and even slightly away from the manorialism that we've talked about. But it's a long process. We're only going to look at the first steps today, and we're going to point out some of the key things that happened along. So we're going to start with England. England actually was a bunch of different tribes, and all these tribes, Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Picts, different ones, they all united under a guy named Alfred the Great. And he was the one who brought England together. There's a picture of him in the top right corner there. Now, Alfred, unites them all in the 900s. About 100 plus years later, his descendant is on the throne of England, and he's going to die without an heir. And it becomes like this struggle for the throne of who's going to be the new king in England, and who's going to have all the lords of the manors, be loyal to him. Well, basically, here's kind of how this played itself out. The descendant tells this noble, one of the lords he has that kind of is in charge of a piece of land on the French coast that somehow belongs to England, because back then some of the land on the French coast actually belonged to England. He tells this guy William of Normandy, he was the Duke of Normandy, Duke William. He says, you're going to be my heir when I die. And he kind of makes a promise. And in fact, he solidifies that promise by sending another noble by the name of Harold to go kind of confirm this with this guy William. But a few more years pass, and according to people who are local and in the area and are native to England, this king changes his mind, and he decides, you know what? Harold is my most loyal noble, not this guy on the coast of France named William. Harold is more loyal and more noble, and he comes from the greatest family in all of England, so he should be the king when I die. And that's supposedly what happens. Now, on top of this, there's a third party that's kind of part of this. There's actually a king of one of the Norwegian countries, or excuse me, one of the Scandinavian countries, who believes he has the right to rule England. And all these people all claim they've got the right to the throne. And so it's going to be a big brouhaha over who is it? Who is the one that deserves the throne? And Harold is the only one that lives in England, so he seizes power and crowns himself king after this king dies. But William hears about it, and he's going to declare war on Harold. And war is going to break out, and you've also got this invasion coming from the north. Well, on top of that, there's also some other people who don't get along with Harold, and so it kind of looks like, even though Harold is the first one to say, hey, I'm king, he's going to have everyone come after him. Well, kind of what happens is Harold manages to collect an army, head to the north of England, stop invaders in the north coming from Scandinavian countries, fight them off, defeat them, and then meanwhile, as that battle's happening, in the southern part of England, off the coast of France, William of Normandy lands with all his forces. So Harold wins one battle way up on the north of England, rushes all his forces back down, and tries to surprise and attack William after he's, come ashore and gotten all his men and all his troops ashore. So the battle takes place in this town south of London called Hastings. And this is the famous battle that kind of shifts the balance of power in English history. William ends up winning this battle, and the Norman forces end up conquering Harold and basically wiping out these Anglo-Saxon forces. And so this becomes known as the Norman invasion of England. So on October 14th, 1066, this battle kind of shifts the direction of England forever. And if you're someone who studies English history, you kind of realize this is a key turning point in English history. And after that, William is the one who dominates, and his descendants are the ones in charge of the throne of England. Now, interestingly enough, the Battle of Hastings itself is pretty phenomenal how it played itself out. You've got Harold had mostly infantry, and his infantry were known as this housecarls, is what they were called. William's forces were mostly archers and cavalry with a little bit of infantry, and you can kind of see that in this picture here. But to get an understanding of how things basically work, I'm going to need to kind of show you. Now, I don't have all the props that I probably should have to make this work, so I'm just going to use chairs. I don't have massive shields like these Saxon defenders had in this battle, so I'm just going to use these chairs. But what they actually did is they formed what was called a shield wall, a lot like some of the Roman forces often did in forming a shield wall. The Saxons did, and basically they got all their shields in a tight formation, kind of so tight that almost overlapping like this, so that you couldn't get a sword through, you couldn't get an arrow through. They just tucked their shields together, and it'd be very tough to break. And this is what happened for most of the battle. And see, what happened is, if you look at the screen here, you've got all these Norman lines that are attacking up here, trying to break through the shield wall. It didn't work. And kind of halfway through the day, it seemed like, man, nothing that the Normans were going to do was going to break through the Saxon lines. They had the higher ground, and it just seemed like the Saxons were going to be able to hold them off and probably win the battle. Well, the Normans used a very, very smart approach. Come the afternoon, and this was, all in one day, they realized after kind of the lunch break, and you can kind of believe it, but actually sometimes battles almost had like a lunch break as people kind of took a breath and got some food and water. The Normans used a strategy, and they both kind of allowed a rumor to spread that William, the Duke of Normandy, died, and at the same time, they planned for when their cavalry and their infantry attacked the center of this line of housecarls, where all that shield wall was, they were going to pretend to retreat. And so what they did is they attacked, and they pretended to retreat, and they basically started a whole bunch of soldiers retreating, and historians debate whether actually Harold fell for it or just the soldiers wouldn't follow orders. But when you see someone retreating in battle, often you chase after them. And basically all these housecarls broke their shield wall, broke rank, and chased after the Normans. And when they did, the cavalry came around, swung into the gap, and started just beating up on the Saxons. And that really turned the battle. For the most part, the Saxons fought till they're about the last man. And supposedly, according to history, they ended up, eventually giving up shortly after Harold himself was killed with an arrow in the eye. Some historians debate whether he actually got shot in the eye, but pretty intense. That's what happened. After William takes over, additional rulers kept trying to expand English power. And so further on, you see people like Henry II, who tried to expand their influence into France. You see there's actually a little part of France over here on the coast known as Aquitaine. That was a province that the English actually took away from France and claimed to own. And so France, as we know it, really wasn't France completely in a lot of the medieval times. But we care about when democracy started in England. All the patriots out there are going to be really excited about, well, when did we see democracy in England? And we copied a lot of our ideas from them. It really starts with the idea of common law. The kings appointed judges all throughout England because they couldn't have every single case come up to them. And so they appointed judges. And what happened was this concept of common law started to appear. And that's the very first seed of democracy. And common law was basically this idea that certain judges would say, well, in similar cases, this other judge decided, to do this. And after a while, when there was similar judgments handed down for the same situation over and over again, even if the law hadn't ever been written by a king, it became known as common law. All the judges will do this when a certain case is brought before them. And so that kind of was the first basis of rights you started to see, was this idea of common law. Well, things kind of really bubbled further over in 1215. King John, one of William's heirs, basically was trying to tax his nobles and tax his nobles again and continue to tax them and raise money for things. And eventually the nobles got sick of it. These lords who he basically given these estates to said, we're done paying you all these extra taxes. We don't think you should be able to do it just for whatever reason. And they actually joined together, and by force, they forced King John to sign a Magna Carta. Now, this wasn't something he wanted to do, but he had to. And so this document in 1215, the Magna Carta, actually established that the king couldn't raise taxes without consent from the nobles. Now that's enormously big deal. We're like, so what, it's something about taxes. But the precedent it set, or the example, was that the king couldn't do whatever he wanted. There were certain rights that the king, and moving forward, later people would say a government can't take away from the citizens. They have those rights, and they can't do that. John tried to go back on his agreement later. It didn't work out. He was eventually chased from the throne, and a little bit later on in the 13th century, by 1295, we had the English Parliament, representatives who were elected by people that could actually speak to the king and give the king advice on issues and make the people's wishes known. So this is how you saw all those ideas of democracy start to sprout in England. Check out the next screencast for how democracy started to sprout up in France. Thanks a lot.